So you've got your poles in the ground. You may or may not have your end walls done. Now it's time to look at the poly, put the poly on. So we're going to talk a little bit about poly and some of the considerations and how we put it on here and tie it down. Plastic selection choices. You know, there's single layer designs out there. There's dual layers. And talk to your supplier about what's right for you. You know, infrared, moisture, mildew. There's some things there that you need to look at when you're selecting, and they'll kind of guide you with some of that and, you know, make recommendations. This one's actually it's a dual layer poly. So there's an infrared layer, and then there's a mold or a mildew or anti-drip layer, excuse me, on the inside, and you can see how much tighter, you know, this one with that inflation happening, how much tighter this one is. So my tunnels, I've got double layered, you know, inflated ceilings in mine, and I really like them. One of the considerations is the strength. I think to me it's a little bit stronger of a structure.
Yeah, I think it's a lot stronger. With one layer, a lot of times people will run ropes over top of it so they can pull it tight. Because with one layer, it's just going to be flapping around in the wind. And so the inflation of those two layers is excellent for strength. And it provides some insulation value as well.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a single layer installation, no matter how well it's pulled, where over the next 3 months it doesn't eventually loosen up and start to flop, right? And then you can run, like you said, you can run batten strapping over the top. I know in our tunnel, some of our tunnels, we've gone for a single layer installation of the woven poly, and we've run strapping over that because you can really cinch it down. But even those, you're right that a double inflated layer is probably as or more structural. My only hesitation on saying just double layer across the board is it requires you to have power in that tunnel. And so like our tunnels are very simple, they're not powered. And so we don't have the power out there for an inflator fan. And that's why we're going with a single layer system with batten strapping instead. But yeah, if you have power in the tunnel, a double layer poly is far and away the easiest solution.
When you're ordering your plastic, there's, you know, the first time you get it, you're going to get it in your kit. And the guys that put your kit together they're gonna have the appropriate length for you. This last time I ordered mine, there were some questions that they had for me. What was I looking for? And actually I wanted something a little bit stronger yet, because I was dealing with some rub through issues that I wanted to fix up on the peaks. As the wind pushed on it, just that little bit of friction there kind of I felt wore through things faster than it should. So, you know, they're going to have those dimensions, but one of the things I had to do, you can't just order, mine are 34 by 144. So you can't just order a 34 by 144 sheet of plastic, because it's not going to be enough. It'll cover the ground, but not go over the structure. So I actually threw a string and a rope over the top of mine and got a measurement for what it actually was, just to confirm. And I think it ended up being, you know, 50 some feet. You know, 150 by 50 I think was what the final sizes were. So
yeah, you definitely want a little bit of extra. And you can maybe see a little bit on this one. Once you do inflate it, it bows up, because it's like a balloon that expands a little bit, and so that pulls a little bit of length up there too.
And you want extras for the pulling. That's always been my experience, is you want a handhold that it doesn't matter if you rip it or if you put some stretch marks in it, so you want to be able to pull down here and still have the plastic on the tunnel be undamaged.
I think maybe an important thing is there's a few different ways you can buy the plastic, as a single layer or as two layers together. And so when I ordered mine, I ordered with two layers, because I'm like, I'm going to put 2 layers on. Let's just do this in one shot. And that worked really well. One thing that did confuse me at first, when I was taking it out of the box, like, where's the end of the sheet? There is no end to the sheet. It's actually a loop. And so you just stretch that over. And then you do have to be very careful on which side of the film is inside and which film is outside. So typically one side of the sheet will have a UV inhibitor in it that protects it from breakdown of sunlight. And to save cost, the other half of it doesn't. And so there's typically gonna be some labeling on it. Sometimes it'll say this side out, or sometimes it'll just have text printed on it, which is what this one has. And in the instructions, it'll say text side out. And so make sure that you follow that, because otherwise it might break down for you in a year or two because you have the wrong side facing outwards.
kind of the key takeaway. Just follow the manufacturer's recommendations. I think it's just make sure you're doing what they say, because that's how you're going to get the maximum value out of it.
Right.
So you can go and buy poly at a hardware store. It's not UV treated, which takes its lifespan from 3 to 5 years down to 3 to 6 months. We have covered tunnels in that before on our farm in a pinch, and it'll work in a pinch. And then by the end of that season, the plastic is already shattered into pieces, and you have trailing pieces of plastic going all over the farm. So it'll work in an emergency. It is not an ideal solution. You really, if possible, want to buy UV treated plastic. And to be honest, the UV treated plastic is not significantly more expensive than the plastic at the store. Those UV coatings, they add a little bit of cost, but they're not significant. So if you have the time and the ability, always buy actual greenhouse plastic. But when you buy your poly, they'll have different lifespans depending on the thickness of the poly or the treatings on it. Greenhouses, you normally want at least 4-year up to, I think they have 6-year plastic, depending on the thickness of it and what kind of coatings it has. My experience is it never quite makes it as long as you would like it to, mostly because it starts to get filmy and then you start to lose plant growth. That's the bigger concern than ripping off. Like if it's gonna rip off, it's just gonna be gone and there's nothing you can do about that. But the moment where you start to see plant health issues is where I say, okay, time to change it out and switch to something else.
Yeah, the manufacturers usually give a range for lifetime, and that's because everybody's environment is different where you're using it. So if you've got a lot of sun and a lot of heat, it's going to be on the shorter end of that. If you have a nice shade and a cool area, which maybe isn't good for growing plants, but then you're going to be able to get a longer life out of that. But a lot of the guys I've talked to, it says 4 years, but they'll replace it at 3 because they don't want to be in that emergency situation where they're in year 4, they're pushing it, and then all of a sudden it rips and ruins their crop for the year. So that's kind of the range of what I've seen. You know, one of the things to think about is that the UV inhibitors, they degrade with temperature. That just accelerates how fast they break down. So if you have an empty high tunnel that you're not growing in for the year, don't seal it up tight because that helps degrade your plastic faster.
You know, when you guys are done with your plastic, I mean, what dictates to you guys when you're done? You mentioned the plant health, but
I've never intentionally replaced plastic.
No?
My experience has been the plastic fails, and that's the moment that I say, okay, I need to replace it.
And I'm in the same boat. I have never actually seen my plastic. I think the max I think I've got is 3 years out of mine, and I ended up replacing it. But the crazy part is my intention was to not leave it overwintered. Or leave it uncovered over the winter because I was concerned about the end walls.
Yeah.
You know, as we get wind loading on the end walls with no plastic, we're losing our structures. So you take it off, my feeling would be that you'd want to put it right back on in order to protect the structure. I think there is value, and I think there's a lot of studies out there about taking the plastic off and letting the natural rain kind of wash that soil again and get some of that happening. But I don't know that the structure itself is meant to do that.
I think you want to think about what it is you're growing. You know, so if you're growing a vegetable crop that dies and isn't damaged by being uncovered in the winter, you know, go for it. I've got figs and pomegranate and stuff like that. So it's actually the winter protection that I really need. And so I have to have it covered in the winter time. Other growers that I've seen in the area, they'll tend to replace it in the fall because they want to be able to get out there right away and be planting stuff, not working on their high tunnel, covering it in the spring. And so that's kind of what I've seen for schedules in the fall. It also gives you the most amount of strength going into the winter when you're maybe not out there every day even seeing if something's going wrong.
And I'll be honest, my personal instinct has always been to replace as early in the spring as possible. I shoot for a day, when we're pulling plastic, I would like the temperature in the high to be over 40 degrees because I think that's important for the plastic to stretch appropriately. I view the winter the opposite way. I would rather keep the old plastic on there because to me that's the highest moment of risk. And I'm not doing a lot of overwinter growing, so I don't have crops to protect. So I would rather put the old plastic on there through the winter. If it rips, it rips. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And then replace it in the spring so that I'm coming right into the growing season. My experience is that first above 40-degree day, the soil is generally still too cold to actually be doing any in-ground growing. And so you have a 2-week window there where you've got to find the right day to get the plastic pulled on it and stretch nice. And sometimes I'll come back in the summer and I'll re-stretch the plastic. You know, when we're pulling it that cold, sometimes you have to come back and readjust it later.
You've bought your plastic, you've got everything done. Now the plastic is over the top of your tunnel. How are you going to affix it to that tunnel? Let me introduce you to wiggle wire. So this is wiggle wire. It actually just falls right into these channels, and there's a kind of a rhythm to it as you're installing it. But basically you just wiggle it right into that channel and it locks that plastic right in.
And you've got to twist it a little bit while you're putting it in, otherwise it won't sit underneath those edges. It's also very hazardous for anyone working alongside you because that loose end of that wiggle wire is all over the place. So you do probably want to have anybody assisting you wear safety glasses, or at least be warned that they should keep their eyes away from where that spring wire end is going to get them.
One thing to note with wiggle wire, it'll be in the instructions, but it's really intended to be a single-use wire. I've known guys that have reused it, and then it's more prone to pull out of the channel in a windstorm. So it's technically disposable, even though it's really tempting to use it over and over.
You can never have too many people to pull plastic. If you think 20 is enough, make sure and get 40. The more people you have helping, the better. You know, we've started in the mornings. I think when we did this first one, the morning we did it, it wasn't as windy, and I think the wind kind of picked up on us as the day went on, and I think we were shorthanded, you know, at times, and I think we had 25 people, if not, we almost 30 people when we built these ones. More is better. I don't think there's any reason not to have too many. So,
I mean, to be clear for people out there, you can get by with a lot less, right? But I think you probably want to shoot for at least 4 or 5, even if it's a small tunnel. Yeah, I mean, I know that Shannon, you've got some experience.
I got by with 2, but you know what really goes wrong is the wind. It's really hard to predict wind. I think the most important guideline that I've seen is get up before the crack of dawn.
get up in the dark.
Make sure you have everything absolutely ready to go before the sun comes up. The wind is, on average, lowest right away in the morning. As soon as the sun comes up, it starts heating the ground, wind, breeze starts happening, and you want as windless as you can. So I did it with 2 people, but that was the strategy that we used. With mine, I pulled it across the ridge from the end. And so with the tractor, run a pipe through the roll, suspended on the loader tractor with the chains on each end, hang it above the ridge, and then you could pull and roll it right across the ridge, and then it just folds down over the sides on both sides. The videos I've seen on YouTube said to do it that way. So that's what I did, and I had success with 2 people. But if you have any breeze, it can go bad really fast.
And really, most of those extra people on your crew are essentially just like people with hands to hold the plastic down, right? You only have about 2 people actually doing real work when you're pulling the plastic, and the rest of them are just there to hold things and pull it in a certain direction to maintain pressure on the plastic. If you have a lot of people, it is nice because then you can have multiple people fastening in different places at the same time. But that also requires not only having more people, but having people who are competent enough at what they're doing to be able to go off on their own and work independently and have a quality product at the end. When you go to pull your plastic, you can pull either direction on the tunnel. You can either pull across the long axis, right, from one end to the other, like Shannon described. You can also pull from the short side across into the top on the other side. Some of the considerations with the different directions of pull, one of the big ones that I've run into is if you're pulling from the sides, you need more people pulling all at the same time. If you're pulling across the ridge, you can get away with one person pulling with a rope from one end because you're only pulling one axis and the plastic is still folded up. The other side of that is if you're pulling across the sides, there's less stuff for that plastic to snag on. When you're pulling over an end wall, if you have someone inexperienced working that side of the plastic, you can actually end up putting like a long seam in your plastic, and it doesn't even have to be a tear, It just has to be a stress. And once you've stressed that plastic far enough, then eventually the wind will hit it or the rain will hit it or something will hit it and it'll snap right there. And so sometimes you end up with a streak going all the way down the length of your tunnel because someone didn't lift it up enough to get it over the wiggle channel or the polycarbonate.
So you were talking about, ridges versus the sides. I play the wind. What way is the wind out of? You're going to want to use the wind to kind of help pin that plastic against the tunnel if you have any sort of breeze. So like today, we're facing north right now. So my thought would be we would pull on this side and go up and over because the wind is going to kind of pin it down to the tunnel. So that's one of the things I think about when I'm pulling plastic. What we do for ours, we work I'm going to call it the hot dog way. So we'll start here and then we go up and over that way. We actually throw tennis balls over, and we take a tennis ball, put the plastic over the top of the tennis ball, cinch it down, and then we wrap our rope around it and cinch it. And then that's what we use to go up and over. You grab enough chunk of a plastic there that you're not going to just tear that out of there.
And that's similar to when I did it over the ridge, the same attachment method with the ball, wrapping the rope around it, and then one person was pulling it. The tractor was up above, lifting the roll well above the peak. And then it was pretty good with just that one person pulling, but sometimes it would droop in between the tubes a little bit. So you need one person prepared on a ladder to help it over those bumps a little bit. But that way I was able to get good success with just a couple individuals, but that was without wind.
I'd say you always want somebody on the inside watching for snags and snares. We often have them in there with like a push broom or something with a long handle that they can lift it up, but a ladder works too.
Yeah.
Piece of towel taped over the top of it so you're not perforating the plastic.
Yeah.
And
I'll say when I pull, I've stopped using the ball and I just tie it around the plastic and I kind of cinch it, but that relies on what we were talking about with having extra plastic, right? Because that plastic is going to be kind of
shot
messed up afterwards. And so having an extra 5 feet of plastic, you can pull through. The only reason I do that is because I often forget the tennis ball.
So once we had the plastic kind of pulled over on this one, there's, being this has got the double wire lock on it. And I don't know that there's really a right way, wrong way. It's kind of everything is based on a comfort, but we actually, that first layer, we wire locked it singular down here.
It's probably important to note that on this plastic, the top and the sidewall are the same piece of plastic. If you had 2 different pieces of plastic, you would need to save this bottom channel just for your sidewalls.
Or pull it past, and basically we did the bottom layer first, and the thought process was when we came back and did this second layer here, by wire locking the top, it would actually tighten that plastic up as we put that second round of wire lock in it. And being this is double wire lock like this, there's definitely some strength advantages here versus just a single layer of wire lock on that.
After the plastic has been pulled across the top of the tunnel, I secure it at both peaks, and I secure it in the middle on both sidewalls. And then you can secure it going down and away from the corner, like a vector in geometry going through the corner out at a 45-degree angle, to pull as many of the ripples out as you can.
I personally like to start at the peaks. I pull hard on my peaks. We pin it there, and then we go to the middle, roughly middle, and then we pull tight there and kind of pin there, and then we fan out and work to the corners.
I use the same approach that you do. I find for me, the advantage of that is that then you can have multiple teams working to different corners at the same time, and they're not fighting with each other because they're only working their own 2 seams. They're not having to work other seams.
I think a key point is you want to get it tight. Like I've noticed, it feels like you have it tight. You think you've got it tight. And then you inflate it and you're like, oh, that was pretty dang floppy. That wasn't tight at all. So definitely want to err on as tight as you can get.
And I would say to anybody pulling plastic, don't be afraid to go back and re-tighten it again after you, like a lot of times I'll pull both peaks and then we'll start pulling the sides, and then by then the plastic is relaxed enough that I can pull more on the peaks, and I'll pull more on the peaks.
Usually a foot. I get another foot out of them.
Yeah.
We're inside the tunnel now, and this one is a double layer, so we got to have some way of getting the air inside of that double layer and inflate it up. And this is the blower that came with this kit, and that double layer of poly. And I don't know, there's tricks to putting that in there, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the big things you want to do is do it before you have this corner all wiggle wired on, because you have to get in there. And so you have to cut a little X. There'll be instructions with it, but nobody reads those. So you cut a little X, and then you poke it through there. And you don't want to cut through both layers. That would be bad. I usually loosen up the wiggle wire on the outside and peel that one back. So there's no chance of cutting the outer layer when I'm doing that. And push it through. And then you also have to get in there because there's a twist lock that you twist tight, and it seals and clamps around that inner layer of plastic. And then there's a little plastic shield that you can't really see that goes on the outside that protects the outer layer once you close it back up, so it doesn't get poked and jabbed on the fan components inside of there. This is a damper, and so when your system is assembled correctly, you're not really blowing air through it. It fills up and then it's just pressurized. But you can use this damper if you have too much pressure. I'm not sure what situation you'd have too much pressure, but if you had too much pressure, you can close this up a little bit and reduce the pressure of the polyethylene. Once you have your structure put up and you have 2 layers on, you always want your fans running as long as you have film on the structure, because it's not just an insulation thing, it's to provide the stability to the film. Because once you turn that off, your film would just flap around again in the wind. So you want to keep it inflated.
Allows that rubbing, keeps it from that, that rubbing and that action, and that's where you get premature failures on the plastic.
Yep. It really stops it from rubbing against the pipe because it's tight. A lot of times people will power this with AC power with 120 volts if you have that available. A lot of times your structure might be out in the field somewhere where you don't have utility power to it, and then you'll use DC.
Solar and battery backups. There's different systems out there that'll kind of accommodate anybody's design intention. So I run AC on mine.
Yeah. I have AC too because I have line voltage there, but a lot of people might build it someplace they don't. I think it's important to know we talked about tearing and snagging a little bit. It's bound to happen somewhere, sometime on your plastic, and you need to be prepared to patch that. So a lot of times the kits that I've seen, they don't come with a repair tape to fix that. So make sure you order that and have that on hand so that when the hole happens, the tear happens, you're ready to patch it right then and there. Otherwise, if you have to order it and wait a week, you've got a week of wind damage that might be ripping that hole open further.